Hello, everyone, and welcome to Pause for Pedagogy, a conversation with Bruce Jackson. My name is Lisa Endersby, and I'm an educational developer at York University in Toronto, Canada, and co-editor of Pause for Pedagogy with ILA. The ILA and I are thrilled to welcome Bruce to our latest conversation in the Pause for Pedagogy series. So welcome, Bruce. I would love if you could begin by sharing a little bit about yourself with us.
Sure. So thank you, Lisa. It's great to spend a little time with you. My background began in the space of positive and sport and human performance psychology. It went from corporate consulting, training and development through building out a leadership center over 7 years and 15 years building out a national foundation to help promote leadership. And then my doctoral work is in flow psychology, peak performance. And I've done my MBA as well with the focus in organizational development and leadership. And my MPA out of the Kennedy School at Harvard is in leadership as well.
That's excellent. Sounds like we've got a range of diverse experience and lots of expertise to draw on with you today, Bruce. Thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome.
So my first question for you, thinking about this article, which I think is really going to be of interest to and resonate with a lot of our ILA members and colleagues, what was the inspiration or motivation for you in writing this article in particular?
Well, I think perhaps it's a bit of the story of this trying to build something that hasn't really been built before. There's so much stuff on the web and there's so much leadership stuff everywhere. And we're, as a funder, as well as a leadership educator, as well as a consultant, and writing on everything from sort of personal leadership to interpersonal and teaming and organization and community. And also as a funder, it's, building something online to scale, because year after year, funding programs that are asking for resources for very similar things. And, we came to the point where content can be distributed in a much more efficient way. And so writing this article was a bit of an exploration of what is it like to try to go from, defining competencies and defining leadership to actually seeking to build leadership content that's competency-based and digital credentials, and exploring the journey of what that's like and what we've suffered through and what we've learned and where we're trying to get it to go and the help we need to get feedback and just kind of that journey, and where partly I think it's going for students to recognize, and leadership educators as we do, the difference between academic proficiency and leadership skills, and the real emphasis around what you know versus who you're becoming, and try to tell all that story. And then how does that all fit with e-learning, and how does that fit into our traditional ways of teaching people and students? And there's a lot of ramifications, and I think the article continues to open more doors of where it's all going and where we should go from here.
Yeah, and I appreciate, Bruce, that you're talking about, which I think may be at the core of a lot of our work in leadership education and leadership development, not just what we know, but who we're becoming. I think that's a really apt way of thinking about and talking about leadership education, and the work that you've been doing in this article that I know many of our colleagues are going to be reading either before or after watching this video is getting into not just what that looks like conceptually, but how we develop and disseminate content that will help our students do that.
Yes, because, textbooks versus online resources, what can you do off campus before they come in? How do you, besides getting a grade in a class on a transcript, how can that also equate to potentially a digital credential that they can then use on LinkedIn and e-portfolios? And I could go down the line, but, in the professional space, in my work at Korn Ferry and Hay Group, professionals today don't really have the time and energy and resources to keep going and getting graduate degrees. They want a micro-credential. They want to say, this is a skill I need. How am I going to get it fast and efficiently? And by the way, can other people see that I have that? And bringing those best practices to young people, to me, I spend so much time with executives and managers that, could have learned this stuff when they were 5, 10, 15, and 20. And we just need a whole new pipeline of leaders. And I think we have the chance to do that. And I think technology gives us a way to distribute that to people that have never had it before in a less expensive, more robust way. But the catch-22 is it's difficult to produce content always for very broad audiences. And so I can talk at some point maybe a little bit about how do you be relevant to as many people as possible,
Right, absolutely. And I think that's a really lovely segue into my next question when we talk about developing and disseminating content and reaching audiences and using and leveraging technology to be able to do that. Your experience and expertise in part comes from your work with the Charlie Life and Leadership Academy, which you discuss in the article. So we'd love for you to tell us a bit more about the Charlie Life and Leadership Academy and also what lessons you've learned about teaching leadership online from your experience.
Well, as I kind of state briefly in the article, the Charlie Life and Leadership Academy was just formed about 18 months ago as an official 501c3. I designed it as a derivative of our leadership foundation to be, rather than just providing cash grants, that we could provide and develop a resource that could give away, like the website has 1,000 free resources on it on leadership. And our goal is to make it the go-to free resource around the world for articles and videos and books and suggested lists, etc. But the Charlie Life and Leadership Academy, then, for those who want to go and start taking courses and earning digital credentials, that's been this initial idea. And so in the article, I kind of walk through a little bit about, C. Miller's work and how I've tried to put the corporate stuff in and build what I think is a competency framework around the 90 skill space, if we were to look at all of it. And, we've been essentially building out our first 14 programs and testing and testing and testing. And, what am I learning from students learning online? Where there's feedback for those who want to read the article. They can click and see the light data. We've had over 175 students give us in-depth feedback on what they've taken so far. And I think, what we're learning is the content is landing on folks right. They're, just because it's soft skill doesn't mean it has to be all in the room face to face, although there's a difference between learning a particular theory or tool or technique or method or model, but then, knowing how to practice that, knowing how to use that, and learning how to go, do it in a real space. And so I think what we're learning is that the content is being well received. The production is being well received. I'm saying what I want it to be an AA plus. My goal is that we've really figured out the secret sauce to, it's 2 to 3 hours in length. There's X number of student videos. We've got all these demographics covered, these kind of student stories, how much research is done, how practical, how fast, how simple, how fun, how interesting. And all that, we keep getting feedback. So I've learned that it's not easy to build content that's perfect. It takes iteration and time, resource, and energy. We're moving in the right direction. We're looking for others to help us understand what makes a great program. And so I think there's a great future in it. And I think we're trying to pioneer a little bit the idea of a resource that is a complete library of competencies. So, whether you're a Columbia University or whether you're a Normandale Community College or a Dunwoody Institute of Technology, and you have a particular leadership model or framework or value system, you could go and say, listen, for what we want, we want to just use these 12 or 15 or 20. It's the same thing with corporate consulting. You usually try to identify a set of core competencies, and then based on the function and level, you start looking at sub-competencies that are relevant. And it's the same thing, and C. Miller points this out in her research, which is, and I think there's core leadership competencies that every student should have. Having a personal vision, setting goals, basic interpersonal skills, conflict, feedback, etc. But then based on whether you're going into engineering, education, law, science, medicine, there are additional very specific competencies that correlate to success in your industry. Right now, the pre-med students that I had at the university, they're doing leadership because they're required to have leadership now, because the research over the last 20 years, if you're a really smart medical doctor but don't have good bedside manner, don't listen well, don't have basic emotional intelligence skills, your odds of being sued go up very high. And I think what I'm seeing, as I also meet with CEOs and business leaders and others, grades and test scores have become necessary but insufficient. And really what they're looking for is the person, and not so much just the straight bench strength of that person. So we're kind of learning what does it take to do that. It's a big, audacious vision. I see that we can do it. Now it's a matter of testing it until we get it right in the small spaces. And then we're going to be continually raising more capital to build out ultimately the whole library.
That's really exciting, Bruce. And I think what you're talking about in terms of process really mirrors a lot of the work that maybe is being done on a smaller or at least a different scale with a lot of our colleagues in their individual classrooms and their own programs. This iterative, developmental, ongoing, perhaps formative process. So I know that you're still in the process of developing the secret sauce. And I think that idea is of great interest to a lot of our colleagues. But I'm curious if you have any advice for other leadership educators who may be listening to our conversation right now and are thinking about a similar process, perhaps, of this ongoing iterative exploration of leadership development or teaching leadership. What advice might you give them in exploring this process, applying this process, or even applying some of your insights into, say, a single classroom, a lesson, a workshop, or a leadership development program?
Well, I would start off by saying that we've, I think, shifted in the last 100 years in higher education from, straight lecture-based pedagogy, which is theory, abstraction, thinking. And over the last 25 years, we've moved a lot more towards engagement and application and how do you really do this stuff. So from thinking about it to actually moving your fingers and toes and lips. And so when you look at, well, what is a student learning in a particular leadership class, whether it's, LMX theory or whether it's servant leadership or any model or, any process of negotiation or persuasion or whatever skill you're talking about, I think that we want, as a leadership educator for me, as much as I want students to understand concepts, I want them to be able to translate that into a concrete skill, whether that skill is a mental skill, an emotional skill, or a communication skill, or what have you, that they can clearly define what that skill and competency is. It's not just, I've become familiar with leadership theory. I have a greater appreciation for global diversity. I understand social justice better. No, I want to know that you know the 5 most important cultural dynamics to pay attention to if you go to China to negotiate something. I want, if you're going into a negotiation, I want to know that you've got 2 or 3 processes and models that you can pull out of your pocket and use. I want to know if you're trying to coach and facilitate performance out of somebody, that you've got a clear and clean model and have practiced that you are going out skilled and not just aware. And so I always encourage leadership educators to move, not just move to, but include in your abstraction the concrete competencies that you're developing in a student, which is what are the learning outcomes? But let's also talk about the doing outcomes. It's one thing to learn it. It's another thing to do it in a safe place. And this is where you get stuck in corporate environments. For 7 years, I trained, senior executives on high performance coaching. You get them in a room, you go through the why, the theory, the practice, you give them a model, you even have them start pairing up and teaming up and using the model and getting awkward with it. And as a former tennis instructor and ski instructor, it's like taking out a student and having them hit 7 forehands. Okay, you've just hit your first 3 forehands over the net, and then you never see them again. And they don't recognize that it's about muscle memory. Can you do that thing 20, 30, 40 times and really go from, conscious competence to unconscious competence? And now you've really ingrained it. And so I'm really, as I engage with a lot of universities, right, I try to help migrate resources like the career centers and the leadership centers and the academics. They all are part of this story of how to help students go through their leadership and academic journey from learning to doing. So I think Charlie Academy offers a way to, when there is a clear leadership 101 course, or you've got a program structure that, first of all, can offer lots of free content and access to YouTube videos and articles that are hot linked, and just be a place where, hey, this is a great article that you might want to look at. That not only can, I think leadership educators can use Charlie Academy to fill blanks, augment what they're currently doing, offer digital credentials in addition to the class that helps not only get a grade, but also build the resume. And I just think get more concrete about what it means to teach leadership. For me, leadership is a big cloud of butterflies, lots of beautifully oriented variables for which very few people have an understanding of how to frame it, make sense of it. You know, is it charisma? Is it this? Is it that? Everybody's got their unique formula. And that's the other thing. When we build leadership programs and we have sequences of activities, it's got to not only be structured and understandable, but it also has to be ultimately personal. And we all know that we go into a workshop and 80% of the people in the room are already probably pretty good at it. And my goal is that every student, whether they're professionals or whether they're young, they're always identifying their core strengths, their core weaknesses, what they could work on. And they've always got their own formula for improvement. And that way, something like Charlie can let students learn the skills and grow in areas that are just the ones that they need and customize it.
Yeah, excellent. And the one thing I also wanted to pick up on that you were talking about, Bruce, was this idea of articles and other resources. And I imagine you're not just collecting them, but you may also be producing them. Are there any areas of future research or writing that you're interested in? Are you writing about anything next? How else are you going to be disseminating some of this knowledge and insight?
Yeah, well, I mean, over the last few years, I did a book called Finding Your Flow, and it's all on leading self. And if you look at the article, I provide sort of my theoretical framework, which I've defined as attentional leadership, which takes into consideration the personal, physically, emotionally, psychologically, philosophically, spiritually, and then personal to interpersonal to team to organization to community, and then trisect it by time with long future, short future, in the moment, short past, long past, and it's a 5 by 5 by 5 cube. And so my Finding Your Flow book was designed to talk about how to focus and find excellence in the self-leadership category. And so from that, I've written a series. I've built an assessment of 60 questions. And from those 60 questions, I've written 60 essays. And those 60 essays are available on my the IAHE.com website. And they are available through Charlie as well. And the next thing I'm doing now is I'm doing a new Finding Your Flow through attentional leadership to talk about competency-based leadership, recognizing how the principles at play inside of self to lead self, whether that's self-communication, which relates to relationship communication, team communication, how organizations communicate, communities communicate, that a true leadership competency is as equally relevant to the self as it is to society, that it scales up and out. So this new book that I'm working on with one of the original writers of the 7 Habits is designed to showcase personal excellence and how it scales out to society. So that's the frame for Charlie. And we're starting with, of course, leading self. Our goal is coping, resilience, happiness, and thriving at the individual level, and then closing the 21st century skill gap with all the skills from interpersonal out. We're starting self and slowly migrating with our test of build. And so we'll be writing more and more on, the skills and the competencies as we move forward.
So actually, I mean, the word is very often overused, this idea of holistic, or maybe considering the whole person in this idea of leadership, I think is a really valuable and important perspective. When we think about the idea of leadership identity or identity development, which is an area of my research, that it is this not so much development, but the negotiation of multiple identities and people and perspectives and opinions. And it sounds like there's a really integrative way of considering leadership development as person and personal.
Well, yes. And I'd like to just point out, like, even mashing together so many different competencies and so many models, I still see a couple big blind spots out there with leadership. And one of the blind spots, or what I think doesn't get enough attention, is the physical self. The other one that doesn't get enough attention is deep history. We do not study history enough to recognize the context and from which we're making decisions today. We do feedback a lot. We do short history a lot, but we don't understand history, where we forget pretty easy. And so, I've spoken at the Naval Academy to the cadets there. I've been in Ghana this year speaking to the law students there, and, everybody sees it differently. Some people teach leadership by shiny belt buckles, and doing your push-ups and making your bed. And other people think about it with, what they put in their bodies. Some of it, like friends in Liberia, they think about the village first. Others think about leading a team. And so I think what I've been trying to do, and I call sort of attentional leadership a binding and a bounding framework. What I've been trying to do is to try to carve out some type of atmosphere for which a lot of these literatures hang out. It's not a perfect, but I think I'm trying to take those clouds of butterflies and make them into a reasonable, systemic, holistic, complex, and infinitely designable way of looking at leadership. So people, because I've done a lot of interviewing with students, especially now, who are saying, well, I'm an introvert. I like to write short stories, and I'm not one of those leaders because those are senators, CEOs, and people I don't like. And then when you start asking them simple questions about, well, what are you doing with your short stories? What are you doing with your poetry? What are you doing with your expression? And all of a sudden they realize that that's how they're leading. And by the time we're through a conversation, they realize, you're leading whether you like it or not. You're influencing the world. And so let's take the word leadership and put it aside for a moment and use the word influence. So to me, if you're influencing self, that means you could be leading yourself at what you think, what you feel, what you do, what your values are, the principles that guide you, what you're doing interpersonally. And leadership is everywhere, whether it's making your bed or changing the world. And I think a lot of models suggest that if you do the little stuff really, really well, your capacity for responsibility and stewardship expands greatly. And when you don't do it well, it contracts swiftly as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Which leads, I think, really nicely into just the wrap-up stage of our conversation today. There are some really exciting, innovative, inspiring things on the horizon for you and your team, which is really exciting to think about in terms of how we can go both macro and micro and think about our own classrooms and how we're contributing to these greater conversations. Is there anything else that you wanted to add or share or leave us as a final thought for our members at ILA?
Yeah, the final thought I have is, I've donated almost 1 3/4 years of my life to moving from idea, assembling a team, finding the funding, constructing content. It's been a very long and challenging 15-hour day journey. And I realized that, doing this in a vacuum, yes, we're getting feedback from a whole variety of universities out there. I guess the final message is like, we're doing this for the benefit of everybody who wants some resource like this for their classroom, or students who want this individually, and really would love to encourage. We want leadership educators and students to help us figure out the secret sauce to what makes a great leadership competency-based program. I mean, we have this model of, if what you have to say in Twitter, you have to do in 204 characters. And then with TED Talks, you got to say what you got to say in 18 minutes. My philosophy with Charlie Life and Leadership Academy is that here's a leadership competency, whether it's critical thinking or whether it's follow through or whether it's vision. What are the essential tools or essential concepts you need in that competency in 2 to 3 hours of online learning? And then you take it out and practice it. So you've spent maybe 7 to 9 hours of totally invested time from learning to doing. So at least you're reasonably acclimated to a competency. And we need help to make sure we're doing that right. So, those folks who want to help us continue to do that, we'd love your help and your feedback.
Excellent. And where can they find you, Bruce, if they do want to chat with you?
They can write me at bruce@charlieacademy.org. They can go to the charlieacademy.org website. They can go to brucehjackson@gmail.com and send me a note. And I would love to offer anything free to everybody to help us figure out how we're moving and how we're going forward. And the more quickly that we can figure it out, the faster external funding will come. And then from there, we'll take the 14 programs that we've built, perfect those, and then we'll systematically build out a whole competency library. And as in contrast to a lynda.com that has over 6,000 courses on everything you can think of, Charlie Life and Leadership Academy will solely focus on competency-based leadership skills for the 21st century that are researched. And this is the place to get the best comprehensive, concrete, simplified, practical place to get it to augment your classrooms.
Exciting. Well, there you go, everyone. It sounds like there's a great opportunity and invitation to engage in some really meaningful work moving forward. So thank you again, Bruce, for joining us today. As we all know, Pause for Pedagogy is an initiative of the Leadership Education Member Interest Group of the International Leadership Association. All of our articles and videos are available at www.ila-net.org, and you can follow us on Twitter at @the_ILA. Thanks again, Bruce. Looking forward to continuing this conversation soon.
Thank you, Lisa.